So do banks generally don't they want to lend? Because I had a huge target. I think my final year Stanbic in 2015 when I left was, I think, to close with a loan book of maybe, I think, 55 billion naira. I started that year with a book of, I think, 22 or 23 billion. So essentially, I was asked to double that book. Now, of course, I mean, if someone is trying to double his book, don't you think that, like, he's looking for people to borrow? But the problem is, with bank lending, generally, is that banks, there's always a mismatch between what startups need and what banks can offer. So banks will primarily fund debt because banks can only take so much interest, right? So the upside for the bank, the return for the bank is not commensurate to the risk they're taking with the business. So I always say to people, don't waste your time going to a bank if your business is less than 2 years old. Because banks want to take risk when they recognize that the business has passed the critical phase of failure. So, like my good friend said here, the early years, 80%, you get the numbers, different people give you different numbers. If we disaggregate the numbers properly, in Nigeria, it's even probably higher. But these are even numbers that you see repeated. Even in more mature markets, at least 3 out of 5 businesses fail within 5 years. The only difference is that in those markets, you're allowed to fail and come back, reinvent yourself, and try again. So you don't want to go to a bank if your business is less than 2 years old. Simple. It's really a waste of your time. You're better off looking for alternative sources of funding. And in my opinion, one of the good things about being an entrepreneur today in Nigeria is that those opportunities now exist. Today, the pool of venture funding in Nigeria is growing. For example, the Lagos Angel Network has regular pitch sessions for entrepreneurs to first apply for selection. So you get shortlisted, and then the shortlisted businesses end up going to pitch at their, I think now, quarterly events. Now, the Angel Network, apart from the fact that you get funding from them, you also have access to very experienced entrepreneurs who mentor you. So the quality of the membership for me is at a very high level. We have people who were, for example, country heads of global consulting firms in Nigeria. We have heads of multinational businesses. We have very well experienced and successful business people. So apart from the fact that you get funding from the network, you also get access to what I consider more invaluable mentoring. In fact, I think that even if you don't need money, it's a process that you should go through as an entrepreneur, because the mentoring in itself sometimes is more significant than the funding. So I won't belabor the point. I'll speak primarily about what we do at the Lagos State Employment Trust Fund. I think that we have a lot of these conversations about why banks don't fund businesses, why it's difficult to access finance, etc. I think many of you know what the problems on the entrepreneurial side are. So I'll gloss over that, but I'll just speak very briefly about 3 things. I think the first thing is essentially just structure. And if we did a small exercise here, so I've gone across, I've heard everybody, so I imagine how many people run a business? We're going to see a lot of hands up. How many people run a business? So I'll play this game where you leave your hand up. For every question I ask, if the answer is yes, you leave your hand up. So how many people run a business? Don't worry, many hands won't stay up for very long. So it's not a very difficult exercise. Account audited. Okay. Okay, so you don't have an, okay, so you can still keep your hand up. So how many of you have a proper human resource policy for your staffing? So that's 4 hands. You're actually cheating because you shouldn't even be participating. So 4 hands. No, don't worry, he knows himself. People that cheat, they always know themselves. So how many of you have a clear succession plan? If today you wanted to stop doing that business, who's your successor? None. 1. None. You do. Is your successor a member of your family? Yes. Okay, then your hand should come down. So you know why I'm asking these questions? The biggest challenge with businesses is structural. If you ask yourself, why do Nigerian businesses fail? And why don't they transit from generation to generation? The biggest single determinant of who runs the business after you is your bloodline. Right? So you pass on the business to your child or to your sibling, primarily because you're related by blood. Not because the person is competent, not because that's the best person to take over the business, but just because it's the closest person to you. But then you know what that does for employees? The challenge with that is that you don't then have as engaged a workforce as you should. One, you have employees who realize that no matter how they sweat for this business, their growth is capped. Two, many of the businesses actually do not have employee stock option schemes. So if I ask you today, how many people actually have schemes that allow your employees own a part of the business? I'm not sure that there are any hands up. But the reality of that conversation is that as a lender, your biggest risk for me is always going to be the people who run the business. It's always going to be what happens when you're not there. It's always going to be what structure happens. Because you see, these things, we've seen it happen several times. And I'll give you a small story. In my first year of banking, it was a very interesting experience to banking. Bloody experience. Thankfully, it wasn't me directly, but one of my colleagues lent a lot of money at the time to a man who sold iron rods in Ibadan. I won't mention his name. And the guy was a very successful iron rods trader.